Can you imagine what it would be like to live in constant fear of being bombed? Not the occasional risk from a terrorist, but an ever-present threat to destroy you, your family, and everything around you. In 1940, that's what it was like for everyone in Britain when the German Luftwaffe unleashed their campaign of terror. Most people alive today have no idea what it was like to live through the Blitz.
At school, after a big raid, they would call the register, and all the kids would call the names out. Sometimes there'd be a pause. Where's so-and-so? Oh, they're dead, miss. Their house was hit last night.
Now, to mark the 70th anniversary, we're going to tell the whole story of the Blitz as it's never been told before. With the help of the Ministry of Defence, on a remote RAF base, we've built this, Blitz Street. A street of houses which we're going to blow up, just like the Luftwaffe did. This isn't a film set, it's real bricks and mortar, built the way houses were then. It'll allow defence scientists to analyse the impact of explosives and allow us to see for the first time what the Blitz actually looked like. And these aren't Hollywood pyrotechnics, they're real bombs. Ranging from the equivalent of the Nazis' high-explosive SC-50s through to Hitler's secret rocket, the V2. We'll witness exactly what those bombs did to streets like this. We'll discover whether you'd be better off under the stairs or in an Anderson shelter. We'll explore the cat-and-mouse battle between the bombers in the sky and the civil defences on the ground. Ultimately, we'll find out why the Nazi Blitz failed and why people who lived in streets like this faced the nightmare of total war and came out stronger.
It was a time at which the British people were asked a very straightforward question: what were they prepared to die for?
By the summer of 1940, the Second World War was nearly a year old, and Hitler was now triumphant master of Europe. The Nazis had smashed their way across the continent, overwhelming Poland, Belgium, Holland and France. And Britain was now in their sights. At home, Britain's newly installed Prime Minister found himself in charge of a frightened nation. His first task was to keep up the morale of the people. We'd evacuated our children, started rationing and built air raid shelters. That summer, we waited with great trepidation for the expected invasion.
Everybody knew that the German parachute was going to come at any moment now, and rape and pillage and whatever, and all these stories were believed.
Brian James was staying with his aunt and uncle in Barking. One day, he overheard them whispering next door.
They were having a serious conversation, and what they were talking about was my aunt was wanting to know how she could best use his pistol to kill her daughter, me, and herself. There were people absolutely determined that they and their kids would not suffer under occupation. The war in the skies over southeast England had been going on for months.
The Luftwaffe were pounding RAF airfields, radar stations and supply depots to gain air superiority in advance of the invasion of Great Britain. Hitler amassed hundreds of planes just across the Channel. The people feared the bombers would one day turn on them.
The German air power has been brought so close to our island that what we used to dread greatly has come to pass, and the hostile bombers can be escorted by their fighting aircraft.
At home, everyone was preparing for the worst.
When you hear the sirens or anti-aircraft guns, you must get under cover at once. If you're in the open with no cover, lie down, preferably in a ditch. If you're within 5 minutes of your home, go home, but keep away from the windows.
Despite government advice, no one really knew how much protection their homes would provide from German bombs. Blitz Street will help us understand what they faced. It's just like a typical row of houses back then, built between the wars for the growing industrial population. We've used the same traditional building techniques. Lime mortar rather than cement, and unlike modern houses, no cavity walls. We've used the same original materials too. Slates for the roof and cast iron guttering. Our street has a shop, and one house is fitted with furniture from the period. So when we bomb it, Blitz Street will behave in the same way as a 1940s terrace would. And in the back garden, we've even installed a real Anderson shelter. Our street's also rigged with blast gauges, so for the first time we'll be able to measure the power of Second World War bombs. High-speed cameras operating at 1,000 frames per second will show us close up and in detail the behaviour of each blast. As you can see, they're wrapped in these blast-proof housings, and they're to help us analyse the explosion, things like the shockwave and how the shrapnel flew about. It should be able to help us understand things like why, for instance, one survivor says that she ended up without any clothes on. They were ripped off her during the blast, and other people got a mouthful of soot or ended up on the roof of their house. The hard-fought Battle of Britain had now reached a critical stage. The RAF were running dangerously short of planes and pilots. Although he didn't know it, Hitler was close to achieving air superiority. He was intensifying the bombing raids, still focusing his attacks exclusively on military and strategic targets. But on a night raid on the 24th of August, by chance, a fatal mistake by German bombers changed everything. They were attacking a Thameside oil installation and missed their target. They hit houses in the East End. Civilians were killed.
Hitler was absolutely furious that London had been bombed without his specific authorization. Churchill saw this as an opportunity and ordered an RAF raid on Berlin. On the night of the 25th of August, about 80 British bombers bombed Berlin. Hitler announced that if the British were going to bomb his cities, he would annihilate theirs.
Und wenn die britische Luftwaffe 2 oder 3 oder 4.000 Kilogramm Bomben wirft, dann werfen wir jetzt in einer Nacht 150, 180, 230, 300...
Hitler began planning a massive blitz, a bombing campaign unprecedented in history. The opening attack would be on the City of London. For the first time, his target would be the people of Britain. The Blitz against Britain would involve a whole arsenal of high explosive bombs, weapons of terror to subjugate a whole nation. In this episode, Blitz Street will experience the power of two of them, the SC-50 and the much bigger SC-500. The first bomb will detonate is the one they dropped more than any other on that first attack on London, the SC-50. This is a simple, unguided or dumb bomb which is dropped over the target from an aircraft. Its shape and fins are aerodynamic to stabilise it in descent. Detonation is triggered on impact with the ground. This ignites the 25 kilograms of high explosive TNT. The blast also shatters the steel casing, hurling deadly shrapnel around the streets. But what sort of damage can we expect it to do when we set one off on Blitz Street? On our secure RAF base, defence scientist and one of the country's leading experts on explosives, Robin Hiley, will be observing a whole series of tests. He's often seen the aftermath of explosions, but this will allow him to analyse what bombs do to buildings in split-second detail.
I'm getting the opportunity to gather data that couldn't have been gathered during the Second World War. Obviously, bombs were raining down. You couldn't put out blast gauges and cameras and so on. And in the immediate aftermath, there was a lot of analysis of the damage that had been done, but without the benefit of modern techniques. So we've got a great opportunity here to reinterpret what actually happened in the Second World War.
Robin uses sophisticated models to predict the impact of the blast, a bit like a weather forecast for explosions, but he knows the computer predictions aren't always right. Let's be honest, the primary reason that you're here is to see whether or not your computer model works.
No, the primary reason is to establish whether that goes down. It's the truth that matters. The computer model is just a model.
I know you've spent the last couple of hours putting all these gauges in, but what are they for?
These measure the strength of the blast as the blast wave shoots past the gauge. They tell you what damage that blast could have done.
And of course some of the gauges are inside the building, aren't they?
Yes, it will give some idea what it would have been like for someone inside that house. One is under the stairs, for example.
The thing that all our experts have been arguing over for about the last 6 hours is whether or not the bomb's going to take out that wall. What do you think?
Well, I think the bomb is going to take out that wall. The strength of a wall like that ought not to be able to resist that pressure.
But you must have seen walls like this being blown up before.
No, I have never seen a charge of this type fired against a wall like that before. So whatever happens is new to me as well.
The first of our two bombs has just arrived. It's our very own SC-50. Is that it?
That's it.
Doesn't look that fierce, really, does it?
I wouldn't want to stand beside it when it goes off.
What about now?
No, it's perfectly safe now.
Ian Graham has been setting off bombs on this base for years. He'll be responsible for the detonation. There's only us lot left here now. Everyone else has been cleared off the pad. Not surprisingly, it's both unsafe and against the law for civilians to drop bombs from planes, so we'll be placing them on the ground instead. The effect has been calculated to be the same as the ones dropped by the Nazis that detonated on impact. So while they set the bomb, I'm off to the safety of a bunker, a few hundred metres up in this direction. Just imagine how it must have felt on that first day of bombing, now known as Black Saturday. In northern France, Hitler had instructed Luftwaffe commander Hermann Goering to unleash a war from the air, the like of which had never been seen before. On September the 7th, 1940, in the late afternoon sun, hundreds of bombers headed for London. At home, No one could have imagined the size of the air raid that was heading their way. On our Blitz Street, a copy of a German SC-50 bomb is in place. It contains 25 kilograms of high-explosive TNT, and it's going to help us to find out the effects of those bombs deployed on that first raid of the Blitz. This is the most dangerous time. Project manager Ian is preparing the detonation. He won't even wear a watch in case it sets off the bomb. I'm in the bunker with defence scientist Robin Hiley. I'm ready. But the people of our capital weren't. Despite the war, Londoners were out that Saturday, enjoying a balmy Indian summer.
Lovely day, nice and warm. I'm looking down the Thames because we were quite high up where we were.
On that first day, 18-year-old George Wheeler was a fireman based in Hackney in the East End of London.
When I looked up, first of all I saw the contrails in the sky where the fighters were up and they were attacking the German fighters. And in the middle of all of this, I suddenly saw all these black specks beginning to appear, literally hundreds of German bombers.
All of a sudden there was a drone in the late afternoon, a drone of planes, and the sky was literally filled. They thought the planes would come over the channel, then they'd start to separate and make for separate airfields. They didn't. That slow column droned towards London, and it was obvious it was just like an arrow making for the heart of the capital.
Steve, can I give you a 2-minute warning?
The site is now secured. No one is allowed within a 2-kilometre radius of Blitz Street. The first sirens of the Blitz sounded at 4:43 in the afternoon. They'd gone off many times before, but the nightmare everyone feared was about to become a reality.
We saw the anti-aircraft shells exploding, all these black puffs in the sky. Then the next thing we heard was the whistle, and the bombs started coming down.
Countdown starting now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fire.
Wishing noise, the most god-awful bang, and then things went literally black through it. I was hit on the head by a large piece of the ceiling coming down, which knocked me flat. And then it was just thick dust, you know, spitting dust, you could hardly breathe. Debris from the ceiling and so on.
I'm about to find out what the first bomb has done to our street.
But it'll be interesting to see what we've got when we get there.
What strikes me is that this really gives you a taste of what it must have been like on that day that became known as Black Saturday. Nobody knew what was going to happen, and once the bombs had dropped, they didn't know what the effect was going to be. It was the start of a new era. After that, there were going to be people chucking bombs everywhere, all the time.
If you pull up here, Tony, I'll go and have a quick look round, make sure everything's safe. I wouldn't go too close.
Yeah. Well, it's really eerie with that pram there, isn't it?
It is. I'll have a quick look round and then I'll give you the thumbs up once it's safe.
Can you imagine what it must have been like coming back to a place like this? You've got all your possessions in there and all those things that you've had for decades, and you're just waiting to be allowed back into your home. We all right?
I'm satisfied all the explosives have gone.
OK.
I think we need to obviously give that building a wide berth. It's not very stable.
Sure.
There's nothing holding the top half up at all.
When the raid was over, everything in the place was wrecked. So the lovely cushions and curtains were just shreds, just hanging shreds. Everything was covered in glass and dust and rubber. The windows had all gone. The ceiling came down, you know, that sort of dirt.
I know a lot of people said that when they saw houses in this state, they reminded them of dolls' houses. I can really see what they mean. It's odd being here looking at this mess. My first thought had been that there's a lot less damage than we expected. The wall didn't actually fall down. But now I'm here, looking at the reality, I'm surprised how shocked I feel. Imagine street after street of this, not knowing if your nearby friends or family were dead or alive. And this was just one bomb. The Luftwaffe dropped thousands of these all through the night for 12 hours. The all clear didn't sound until 5 a.m. That morning, they started to count the casualties of the raid. 1,600 people seriously injured, 430 dead. The scale and devastation after that first night of bombing was shocking.
That first night actually set the pattern for the Blitz. The total devastation. The warehouses around the docks burned, and so it was that pool of London round Victoria Docks. Silvertown, Poplar, East Ham, West Ham, Stepney. Those were the places that got it that night.
But it's the terrible human cost of bombing that fireman George Wheeler remembers from being on rescue duty that morning.
There was mums, grandparents, children, but the hardest part was babies. You just had to ignore what you saw. If they weren't alive, you just left them. If they were alive, you got them out and you took them and you laid them on the pavement so that the ambulances could take them away to hospital.
My mother came to collect me from where I was staying down in East London. And we were walking through the streets and hoses everywhere and the smell of burning. And down one side road there were lines of black bundles, which I then realised were bodies. And walking along with my mother holding my hand, and she suddenly started to cry.
London's hospitals were swamped with casualties. Nurse Phyllis MacDonald was overwhelmed by the victims of the raid.
The doors flung open, And in stood this man, this poor man. And he was completely covered with debris. He had his arms stretched out. And he said, my eyes, I cannot see. And he was led away, and they all came in one after the other with terrible injuries. And I was relieved at 9:30, and I sat down and my apron was smothered in blood. And I just sat and laughed. Well, my dear friend came in at the time, and she gave me a great big slap across the face, and that brought me to my senses.
The idea was to destroy the enemy psychologically as much as physically. And the shock effect of bombing was an important part of this.
Churchill came the next morning to have a look at it. And he was absolutely horrified by what he saw. I mean, it was just the sort of war picture that you imagine, a picture of total war. It was Armageddon, it really was that night.
It was clear to Churchill that the new battle would be for the minds of the people.
Winston Churchill said, Hitler knows he must break us in these islands or lose the war. Hitler announced that there will come a moment when one or other of us must break, and it will not be Nazi Germany. The question was, would the British people break under German bombing? If so, Britain would lose the war.
Blitz Street has suffered damage from its first bomb attack. But now it can help us reveal what happens in those moments when a bomb detonates. As our team prepares to detonate our next bomb, which will be 10 times the size, I'm going to find out exactly what our first bomb did to our street with defence scientist Robin Hiley. Technically, what's happened here?
OK, the blast, the overpressure from the bomb just in the middle there, has pushed against the walls and has pushed the bricks in, except where the staircase has provided support behind in that sort of little triangle there.
So that's the shape of the cupboard under the stairs, isn't it?
It is indeed,
So
yes.
our people who hid in the cupboard under the stairs may well have been safe.
They may have been protected.
The blast gauges tell us that if you'd been under the stairs, you'd have been subjected to an impulse of 200 kilopascals. And amazingly, that means you would have survived this blast. This helps explain the memories of people like rescue fireman George Wheeler.
I'd been to places where they said there's people trapped in there. Then we dig them out and we find that, yeah, the whole family was sheltering underneath a staircase. And in a lot of cases, they survived.
What I find really impressive is the state of the terrace opposite. You've got the windows blown out, the doors, but most incredibly, all that pitting on the brickwork. What would have caused that?
Well, pieces of the casing of the bomb, accelerated by the explosion, travelling faster than bullets, would have flown in, whacked into the side of the wall, knocked pieces of the brick out.
People could have died on the other side of the street, couldn't they?
Oh, if they were hit by one of those fragments, yes, certainly.
People can survive blast, but shrapnel is more deadly. Just watch it fly off from the bomb casing past the houses. Fragments are travelling at an astounding 7,000 miles an hour. That's almost 10 times the speed of sound. From this angle, look at the far end of the terrace on the left. You can see the shrapnel tear into the brickwork. Even a minute fragment could kill you. What about this extraordinary accumulation of glass at the end of the street?
I think what's happened there is that the glass has been sucked out by the pressure waves bouncing back and forth.
And that's why it's all gone up the end there?
It's all in the street, yes.
One other thing that really strikes me, amid all this chaos and debris, you've got this 1 pint bottle of milk that's completely untouched.
Yes.
It's odd, isn't it? It looks like a really defiant, optimistic gesture that you've still got your pint of milk there. On September the 7th, 1940, Hitler introduced modern terror to Britain. Everyone on the home front was now at risk. It really could have been anyone, as the Blitz continued relentlessly. What happened on that first night happened again night after night, first in London, then all over the country. For 9 months, people had to endure the terror. 1 in every 7 houses was damaged or destroyed.
Obviously, once you'd had one really bad bombing, you imagined that the bombers would come back. And there was tremendous anxiety and fear. And there was also anger. I think people felt very defenceless after that first night because they seemed to be at the mercy of the German bombers.
During the first raid, only 92 guns defended the whole of London. But Churchill rapidly reorganised and improved defences. Within 4 days, twice as many guns were available, under orders to fire at will. Barrage balloons were also put up. Churchill hoped that this might lift the spirits of the British people. For young women in the Royal Artillery, like Dorothy Hughes, it was a difficult time.
There were so many guns firing, and all firing at the same time. And they announced to the gunners, even if you're not on target, fire, just so that you give confidence in the people on the ground.
The Blitz was becoming a battle for the morale of the civilian population. And in that battle, Britain had a trump card, the speeches of Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The next day, he addressed the nation.
We must regard the next week or so as a very important week in our history. Every man and woman will therefore prepare himself to do his duty. All the world that is still free marvels at the composure with which the citizens of London are facing the great ordeal, the end of which cannot yet be foreseen.
The Luftwaffe were now attacking London relentlessly, and they'd also changed their tactic. They'd switched to exclusively night bombing, making British fighters less effective against them. Every night that September, the bombers came back. Occasionally 50, but sometimes as many as 300. They brought with them bombs like the SC-50, and even bigger ones like the SC-500.
This is the 500 kilo with a length of some 4'6". This fellow causes a great deal of damage.
Like the SC-50, the SC-500 is similar in shape, but it contained a huge 250 kilograms of TNT. And that's the next bomb we'll detonate on our street. Robin, how far away is this bomb going to explode from our terrace?
It's 14 metres away today. The charge is much bigger, though. It's 10 times the weight of explosive.
So does that mean 10 times the amount of damage?
No, 10 times the amount of explosive will be 10 times as much energy, but that energy is spread away from the explosion.
I see, so the energy goes in all directions, doesn't it? It's up and down and backwards and forwards and sideways.
Yes, so we expect that as the shock wave spreads out, there will be an intense shock on the corner of the building where it was struck yesterday, probably taking out most of that house and along the wall facing the bomb.
And of course, this is where our shop is, which survived pretty well intact.
Well, that shop front there, I'm sure now, if you look at the model going along here, is going to get a fairly intense pulse. And I think it might go into the building, but it's possible it'll get a negative effect and the bits might fly out into the street.
All this, 10 cardboard boxes of TNT, comprise today's bomb. The last bomb did that. This bomb has got 10 times more explosives in it, which they're going to put on there. The 250 kilograms of TNT won't be put in a casing this time. If we did, the fragmentation from a bomb of this size could damage other buildings on the site up to 1 kilometre away. Though the blast will have the same effect on Blitz Street.
Gasco 12. Can I give you a 2-minute warning?
This bomb is so big, only some of the Luftwaffe's Heinkel bombers carried them on raids. Instead of carrying 40 SC-50 bombs, they could only deliver 4 enormous SC-500s.
Every time I heard the siren go, my stomach turned over.
Patrick Child was 8 years old, living in Wandsworth with his family.
Everybody's dead, it's not just me. You know, you get this awful feeling, oh!
Another air raid siren would go. We had loads and loads of bombers coming over. They were frightening. You could see them and hear them.
These Germans are getting closer, quite terrifying. So we dived under the kitchen table. Sounds a silly thing now because it wouldn't have made the slightest difference if we just sat in an armchair, I'm sure. But you've just had to try and protect yourself.
Gasco 6, this is 12. Countdown starting now.
All the muscles in your body tense up.
5.
You're clenching your fists and your eyes are shut tight.
4.
It's the most horrible, horrible thing.
3.
And your fingernails are digging into the palms of your hand.
2.
Because you know that within the next second or two you could be dead.
1.
And you're praying. Believe me, everybody prays.
Fire.
This bomb blew the top floor off of our building, and the shock of the explosion was really awesome. You could feel the whole building move from one side and back again, about 9 to 10 inches, and we were shaking with fear. It's hard to describe the horror. Just utter, utter terror.
I felt as if the whole world had caved in. It felt like an earthquake underneath your feet. The ground shuddered.
It's hard to describe the horror, to give it enough reality.
It exploded our second bomb on Blitz Street, the equivalent of the German SC-500. It contained 10 times more high explosive than our first bomb, a massive 250 kilos of TNT.
Whoa.
Bit of a mess. By the middle of October, the Blitz on London had been raging for over 40 nights without any respite. And still they came.
It was far worse than anybody had anticipated. Every night there were bombs. There was debris everywhere, ambulances, fire engines, and of course people had lost their homes, they'd lost their possessions. So there really was complete chaos.
I'll get out and have a quick look around, Tony.
Cheers.
I'll let you know when it's safe.
With the SC-500 causing much more damage than our first bomb, it's imperative that project manager Ian Graham makes his safety checks before we're allowed in. How are we doing?
It's all clear.
It's even more eerie than before.
After they stopped bombing us, they sound the all clear. And that will give you a wonderful feeling of elation, you know, terrific, you know. But then the dust and all this debris, the air was thick with it. And you were coughing and, you know, it was in your hair, completely covered in it. I don't know, really, how long people could stand living like that.
Look at the state of the roof. It's almost as though it describes the actual force of the power.
It's a good example of progressive collapse of a building. The collapse has started at this end, progressively moved along the structure, and the last house is almost intact.
I'll tell you one thing, the corner of that building has stayed absolutely robust, hasn't it?
Structurally, yeah.
We thought that that was going to be blasted right away.
Just watch your footing. I don't think anybody should walk down that street. That front wall doesn't look very safe.
What, this one here?
Yeah.
It's pretty bowed, isn't it?
At this end of it, yeah. It's still tied in at the party walls, but it doesn't look very safe to me.
Hey, look around here. Look at this. That other milk bottle still survives.
Still survives.
Go on, my son.
Defiant.
We've seen the aftermath of the SC-500, but now defence scientist Robin Hiley can look at our specialist slow-motion footage in order to examine the anatomy of these blasts as they've never been seen before.
The first thing we see is a very, very intense fireball. The shockwave strikes the end of the building, much more powerful than last time, and it looks as if it may have got into the roof space from the far end and is pushing the roof tiles away from the roof. Here we're inside the shop as the blast wave comes down the street, followed by the fireball.
So what is that that's actually coming in through the door? It's almost like a ghost coming through the door.
It's the blast wind that follows the shockwave, and dust, and part of the fireball actually curls around into the room. You can imagine a person would have been pushed by the blast and thrown around. Many injuries were caused by people being thrown against something else.
If the shock wave can injure you inside a building, outside it can be deadly. These deaths were the most surprising and shocking to those who witnessed them.
A lot of people died from what they call blast lung. The blast sucks out the air from the body and the lungs come up and choke. And you look at them, there's nothing wrong with them. Thought, why aren't you awake? Wake up. Talk to me. No, no. They're dead.
The bus outside, that got blasted. And when my sister saw it, she said, I thought they were all sitting there waiting, but they were all dead. Because she thought they were just sitting there, what are they waiting for, you know? And the policeman said, they're all dead, blast killed them all.
The ambulance men brought this poor soul in. She was stuck to a door. She had nothing on except her underclothes. Her arms are outstretched, so she'd been crucified. And the husband stood with her, and he was absolutely sobbing. He said, please, don't tell me my wife is dead. But she was. She'd been blasted up against the door. And he just stood and he sobbed.
By the end of October 1940, Londoners had been ravaged by the Luftwaffe's bombs for a staggering 57 consecutive nights. But despite the thousands dead and injured, Londoners were learning to cope both mentally and emotionally. Among the rubble, signs of hope began to appear. A new spirit was emerging that seemed to be saying, despite everything they've endured, the people could take it. Next time, the story of the Blitz continues. Hitler's bomb factories were turning out much bigger bombs like the SE-1000, nicknamed the Hermann. This will be the next bomb to hit Blitz Street. It's bombs like these that were used to try to wipe the city of Coventry off the face of the earth. And in London, the Luftwaffe began a horrific new campaign, attacking the capital with deadly firebombs.